In this video, I want to talk a little bit about fluid balance and the major electrolytes in the body. First off, what do I mean by fluid balance? Basically, I mean this. Water going into the body equals water coming out of the body. It's important to maintain this balance. It's important to keep your fluid levels in homeostasis because pretty much everything that happens in your body happens in a watery solution. And if those solutions get too concentrated or too dilute, your cells just can't function as well. So, to consider the fluid balance, we need to know where water is coming from and where it's going. Water comes in, of course, through drinking, and it doesn't have to just be water that you drink. Basically, any type of fluid that you take in contains a certain degree of water in it. Even coffee, you get a little bit more water from coffee than you lose due to the diuretic effect of coffee. Alcohol is an exception. Alcohol is a pretty potent diuretic, so alcoholic drinks shouldn't count towards your water intake. You also get a fair amount of water from the food that you eat. On average, most people get about 20% of their daily water intake from their food. Of course, this varies with diet. Some foods, like fresh fruits and vegetables, have a fair amount of water in them, whereas if you eat the same food after it's been dehydrated, like a raisin or a prune, it's going to have much less water in it. Of course, the percentage also varies with your water drinking habits. If you tend to drink more water, then a larger proportion of your water intake is coming from that. This third category of water in isn't so much water intake as it is water formation. Metabolic water is water produced by chemical reactions in cells. For example, if you think about anabolic reactions, in many anabolic reactions that happen within your cells, water is removed from two monomers in order to join them together. So if you have substance A joined to a hydroxyl group plus substance B joined to a hydrogen, your cells join them together and form water in the process. HOH is simply another way of writing H2O. Metabolic water also includes water produced by cellular respiration, particularly from the electron transport chain. You have water being formed as oxygen pulls electrons off of the end of the electron transport chain. Now, water leaves our body in a number of different ways. It leaves our body when we urinate, in our feces, when we sweat. So if it is a warm day or if you're exercising a lot and you're sweating a lot, you're losing more water. You may start to get thirsty. You also actually lose water when you're breathing. The air that comes out of your lungs is moist. If you don't believe me, try holding a mirror up in front of your mouth as you exhale. That water that condenses on the mirror, that's water that you're losing from your body. If you want to start talking approximate exact values for how much water is coming from these different places and how much water is leaving your body through these different routes, this gives you an idea. Again, these are averages, so depending on your particular conditions, depending on what, how much you drink, what foods you eat, how concentrated your urine is, temperature, how much you're sweating, respiratory rate, how much you're losing as you breathe. These numbers can vary, but on average, you take in about 2.5 liters a day, approximately half as liquid, a little bit less than that as food, and a small amount produced, relatively small amount, produced as part of metabolic reactions in your cells. For method of elimination, urination is the main one, evaporation of the skin, sweating is another significant one, some lost in the lungs and some lost in the feces. Of course, if you have watery feces, such as a diarrhea condition, this number is going to be much, much higher. Also note, water in equals water out. fluid balance. The amount of water that you have in your body varies a bit from person to person. On average, it varies by gender. So on average, adult males have about 60% of their body's mass is water, and 40% is solids. On females, it's on average closer to 50-50. However, this is a really rough average. The difference between males and females on average comes from the difference between lean tissue, muscle mass, and fat tissue. Lean tissue has a higher water content than fat tissue. Muscle is about 75% water, and fat is only about 10% water. And women tend to have a bit more fat tissue on average. So, again, on average, they tend to have a bit lower percentage of water in the body. Of course, you could find an individual male and an individual female that contradict these, but on average, men tend to have a little bit more water because they tend to have a little bit more muscle mass. The water that you do have in your body tends to be distributed between different compartments. That's what you're seeing here with these different wedges. Let me show you an image that'll help illustrate what I mean by the different water compartments. Roughly, fluid can be found in either the intracellular space, so this is the fluid that's found within your cells in the cytoplasm and the nucleoplasm. You also have extracellular fluid, and extracellular fluid includes interstitial fluid, the fluid that's found between cells in the tissues of your body. It also includes plasma, the fluid within your blood vessels. There is a constant exchange of fluid between these different spaces. So there's an exchange of fluid between the plasma and the interstitial fluid, and an exchange between the interstitial fluid and the intracellular fluid. But they're referred to as different fluid compartments because they have distinct compositions. There's a separation between the intracellular fluid and the interstitial fluid. The plasma membrane allows for the solutes in these fluids to be different, to be found in different concentrations. And there's also some separation between the plasma and the interstitial fluid, for example, due to proteins that don't leave the plasma. So if you look back at the overall pie charts, about half of the water in the body is found within your cells, in the intracellular compartment. 33% is half of 60%. 27% is half of 50%. The other half is extracellular, largely interstitial fluid, but also water in your plasma, and a small proportion in other body fluids. Other body fluids includes the lymph, the cerebrospinal fluid, the synovial fluid of your joints, serous fluids, aqueous humor, endolymph in your ear. These fluids are in very small quantity, but they're still classified as part of the extracellular compartment. When water enters or leaves the body, it passes first through the extracellular compartment. Think about drinking a glass of water. That water is taken up from the GI tract into the blood, a part of the extracellular compartment. Think about water leaving your body as urine. First, that water must be pushed out of the blood into the kidneys. But because osmosis can occur across the plasma membrane, changes to the amount of water in the extracellular compartment can affect the intracellular compartment. Let's look at the excessive loss situation up here. That's shown in this top diagram. If you have excessive amounts of water leaving your body, that water is coming out of the extracellular compartment. When that happens, when water is being drawn out of the extracellular compartment, the solute concentration increases, the osmotic pressure increases, and that osmotic pressure sucks water out of your cells through osmosis.
As your cells lose water, their solute concentration increases, the cells shrink. They cannot function as effectively as they do under normal conditions. Of course, you also have problems associated with loss of fluid from the extracellular compartment, such as low blood volume and low blood pressure, which makes it more difficult to circulate oxygen and nutrients to your cells. This also can leave you feeling quite tired, and it triggers the thirst response, which is your body basically telling you that you're dehydrated and you need to take in more water. If you have excessive amounts of water in your extracellular fluid, you have water pouring into that extracellular compartment, the solute concentration and osmotic pressure in that extracellular compartment drops, which means that relatively your intracellular compartment now exerts more osmotic pressure, and water gets sucked into your cells, causing your cells to swell. When this happens in your brain, this can lead to confusion, hallucination, coma. Basically, these symptoms can be very problematic if you take in large quantities of water in a very short amount of time. And if you don't allow yourself to urinate, which is the body's normal means of eliminating excess amounts of water. You also get symptoms due to low sodium concentrations. And sodium is very important to the functioning of your nervous system. So interfering with the normal concentration gradients of sodium is another major problem with drinking too much water at once. And in fact, drinking too much water at once in a short amount of time can actually kill you. There are multiple examples of this, but one fairly recent one, it happened in 2007 in California, was a radio station held a contest called Hold Your Wee for a Wee. It was basically contestants were given water to drink and not allowed to urinate over a period of time, and the person that could go the longest won a Nintendo Wii. And one of the contestants actually went home complaining of a very painful headache, went upstairs to take a nap, and never woke up. So, anytime anyone comes up to you and says, hey, let's have a water drinking contest, just say no. Now, there are 3 major regulatory hormones, although actually technically there's 2 types of natriuretic peptides, you could say there are 4. These hormones, they all contribute to controlling your water balance, making sure that your water in stays equal to your water out. Antidiuretic hormone, we talked about in the urinary system, stimulates water reabsorption at the kidneys. It also stimulates thirst, and it's released when your blood osmolarity increases. So that just means when your blood has a high solute concentration, when your blood is too concentrated. Antidiuretic hormone helps you want to take in more water, and helps you hold on to the water that you already have. Aldosterone can be activated by a few different things. It can be activated by angiotensin, part of the renin-angiotensin pathway. It can be activated by high levels of potassium in the blood or low levels of sodium in the blood. And aldosterone promotes sodium reabsorption at the kidneys. And water follows the sodium back into the blood. So aldosterone, by promoting sodium reabsorption, it also promotes water reabsorption. So both antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone increase the amount of water in your body, or at least help you hold on to what water you have. The natriuretic peptides, these are actually geared towards getting rid of excess water, so they decrease the amount of water in your body. To help you remember what they do and how they act, recognize the root words. Uretic, same root as in diuretic. A diuretic is something that makes you urinate. The natriuretic peptides, they increase your urine volume. And how they do it is by acting in part on sodium. And the Latin term for sodium is natrium. That's why sodium has the symbol Na. There are two natriuretic peptides, BNP and ANP, brain natriuretic peptide and atrial natriuretic peptide. Despite the name, both of these are actually produced by the heart. BNP is produced by the ventricles. ANP, as you might guess, is produced by the atria of the heart. The only reason why BNP is called brain natriuretic peptide is because it was first discovered in the brain, even though it's actually produced by the heart. And what triggers the release of the natriuretic peptides is actually the stretch of the heart wall. So if you have too much fluid in your blood, you have increased venous return, your heart wall stretches, and that triggers the release of the natriuretic peptides. And what the natriuretic peptides do, they reduce thirst, so they make it so that you don't bring in more water. They also block the release of antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone, so that you are able to lose more water, so that you get more sodium, more natrium lost to your urine, and water follows that sodium out in the urine, leaving your body. Now remember, antidiuretic hormone is constantly released at a regular level. The level of antidiuretic hormone increases when you're dehydrated. Natriuretic peptides decrease that regular level of antidiuretic hormone when your blood volume and blood pressure is too high. Now, I'm talking about the electrolytes together with fluid balance in this video because electrolyte balance and fluid balance is related. Since water follows the electrolytes, water is drawn to solutions with a higher concentration of solutes, and the electrolytes, largely in your body, it's the electrolytes that are those solutes drawing water into various compartments. An electrolyte is basically a substance that dissociates into an ion in solution. So in the human body, these include sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride. They're called electrolytes because this ionization allows water to conduct electricity. And you may be familiar with the term electrolytes by a discussion of fluids that promise to return electrolytes to the body. It's your total electrolyte concentration that affects your fluid balance. Sodium in particular is important because sodium is the major extracellular electrolyte. But each individual electrolyte also has its own functions. And it's important to keep the electrolytes in balance. You want to have your electrolytes in equaling your electrolytes out. And you get electrolytes from drinking. Anytime you are drinking a substance that has any sort of minerals in it, you are getting electrolytes. Even if you're drinking just tap water, there's usually some electrolytes picked up before you ingest it. You also get electrolytes in food. How many of you have ever sprinkled salt on a food, on something you're eating? Salt is an electrolyte. Sodium and chloride. You lose electrolytes in mostly the same ways in which you lose fluid. You lose them through urination, defecation, sweating, not so much breathing, but you can lose them if you're vomiting. You lose electrolytes from your stomach contents. Urination is really the major site of electrolyte loss. However, if you're exercising excessively, particularly on a hot day and you're sweating a lot, you lose a lot of electrolytes that way as well. And that's why if you are exercising for a long period of time, over like an hour, maybe less under very hot conditions, it's important to replace electrolytes as well as water. The distribution of electrolytes between the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid differs because the plasma membrane is semi-permeable. Ions do not diffuse freely to equilibrium, so you have different concentrations of ions on different sides of the plasma membrane. These are some of the major electrolytes: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, chloride, phosphate, sulfate, even protein anions. Remember, anion means negatively charged ion. If you look at sodium, there's much higher concentration of sodium in the extracellular fluid, in plasma and interstitial fluid. Relatively little inside the cell. Potassium is the opposite. There's relatively little potassium outside the cell and high levels of potassium inside the cell. If you think back to the concentration gradients that you talked about when you were learning about the nervous system, this is the plasma membrane here. Remember that it's important to have a concentration gradient of sodium set up so that there's more sodium outside the cell than there is inside the cell. Okay, so that you can open sodium ion channels and have sodium diffusing inside your cells to depolarize your nervous system cells. It's also important to have a concentration gradient such that potassium will move outward when potassium channels open to repolarize your cells. This is important for functioning of the nervous system, functioning of your skeletal muscle, functioning of the heart. It's important for a number of different functions in the body. This slide summarizes some of the major functions of major individual electrolytes. First off, potassium, as I said, potassium is the major cation. Cation just means positively charged ion. It's a major cation in the cytoplasm. It's absolutely critical for nervous system and muscle functioning. You find some of it in bananas, that's why I put that there. Sodium is the major cation, the major positively charged ion in the body fluids. It's essential for nervous system and muscle functioning, just like potassium is. Also, because there is such a high concentration of sodium in the body fluids, sodium is very important in regulating fluid balance. Water tends to follow sodium. More sodium pulls water into the fluids. This is why part of why chronically high sodium intake is associated with hypertension. If you have high levels of sodium in the blood, you're going to tend to have more fluid in the blood, which is going to increase your blood pressure and force your heart to work harder. This diagram illustrates the relationship between sodium and fluid balance, and thus the importance of sodium in water balance. So if you start with homeostasis, you start with a normal fluid balance. If you have an increase in extracellular fluid volume, you have increased blood volume, increased distension of the heart, stretching of the heart, release of the natriuretic peptides, which leads to increased sodium loss in the urine, which draws water into the urine as well. Combined, these effects reduce blood volume, bring blood pressure back into homeostasis. Converse, if you have a decrease in extracellular fluid volume, you have decreased blood volume and blood pressure, you have activation of the renin-angiotensin pathway, increased aldosterone, and increased antidiuretic hormone release. These combined, they cause retention of sodium from the urine, including which stimulates retention of water and brings the extracellular fluid volume back to a healthy functioning level. So potassium and sodium are major cations, major positively charged ions. Chloride is the major anion, negatively charged ion, found in body fluids. Chloride is also essential for the formation of hydrochloric acid in the stomach. A few more major electrolytes that are worth mentioning. Calcium, also essential for nervous system and muscle functioning and essential for cardiac functioning. Don't forget the heart muscle. Calcium also is essential for mineralization of your teeth and formation of strong bones. In fact, if you think back to the discussion of the skeletal system, bone acts as a reservoir for calcium, and your body will actually break down bone in order to keep blood calcium levels constant. Phosphate is also important in the mineralization of bones and teeth. If you recall, the part of bone, the molecule in bone that makes it hard, is calcium phosphate. Phosphate's also important for making ATP and for making the nucleic acids. These all require phosphate. Magnesium has a function in keeping a number of enzymes working. It acts as a cofactor essential for the activation of numerous enzymes, including enzymes involved in making proteins and making ATP. So these are just a few of the major electrolytes. It's by no means all of them, but it illustrates, at least in part, why keeping electrolytes within a normal range, keeping electrolyte concentrations within a normal range is vital. Very important processes will be disturbed if you have too few or sometimes too many of a particular electrolyte. This table summarizes some of the effects of different electrolyte imbalances. It also names them, and you should be familiar with these names. Primarily, you should recognize the prefixes. Anytime you see hyper, understand that that's going to mean high levels, too much. Anytime you see hypo, that's going to mean low levels, too little. I've got major electrolytes listed here, along with, in parentheses, their normal blood ranges. Blood ranges are given in terms of equivalence, and that's an equivalent is the amount of an ion that gives 1 mole of electrical charge. So it depends on what the charge is on that ion. 1 mole of potassium only has 1 positive charge per potassium ion. So 1 mole of potassium is 1 equivalent. However, calcium ions are 2+. They have 2 positive charges. So 1 mole of calcium ion is 2 equivalents. And then MEq is just milli-equivalents. So 1,000th of an equivalent. Now, the suffixes may be pretty easy to figure out. Calcemia, you're talking about calcium. Magnesemia, you're talking about magnesium. Phosphatemia, you're talking about phosphate. Chloremia, you're talking about chloride. For sodium and potassium, the suffixes actually refer to the Latin name for the element. So I mentioned sodium, the Latin name is natrium. That's why sodium has the symbol Na. For potassium, the Latin name is kalium. That's why potassium has the chemical symbol K. So when you're looking at the suffixes for the imbalances of sodium and potassium, you see hypo and hypernatremia for sodium and hypo and hyperkalemia for potassium. I have common symptoms listed for each of these imbalances, as well as typical causes, oftentimes having to do with diet or something going on in the kidneys or some problem with excretion, such as vomiting or sodium in particular, problems in water balance can lead to imbalances of sodium, like dehydration. You get too concentrated sodium, you get hypernatremia. Water intoxication, you get hyponatremia. Okay, after studying this video, you should be able to talk about both fluid balance and electrolyte balance. As far as fluid balance goes, you should be able to identify sources of water and ways in which we lose water, and you should be able to identify the different fluid compartments of the body. Should also be able to identify the major electrolytes, both intracellular, potassium primarily, and extracellular, sodium primarily, but also chloride. You should explain how the electrolytes are related to fluid balance, particularly sodium, and the osmotic mechanisms behind this relationship. You should be able to explain how ADH, aldosterone, and the natriuretic peptides work to maintain fluid balance. And you should be able to identify the major electrolyte imbalances, including matching the term to the right electrolyte, like know that hyponatremia is too little sodium.